This evening's presentation, as all First Fridays, are sponsored by the Town of Woodside's Arts and Culture Committee, a group of like-minded volunteers who've been doing this for more than 10 years, providing some interesting programs for our community. That's what we're about. So this evening is just another example of that. Here we have a person who's presented for us before. Kathy's been with the Friends of Edgewood for more than 30 years, providing interesting information to the public and to visitors. And this evening, she'll be presenting it to you. For those of you, in fact, how many have been to Edgewood? Raise your hand. Wow, that's fantastic. As a resident of Woodside, I view Edgewood as kind of one of our unknown treasures. It's kind of hidden. You go down the road, you see a kind of trail disappearing. You're not sure what it is. There's all those cars parked. There's no big sign out front, but it's a beautiful place to explore, especially as you will see this evening and learn all about it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. And here's Kathy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom, for the introduction. And I have two purposes for being here today. First, I want to share with you some pictures that I've taken at Edgewood over the 30 years that I've been involved with it. And the second thing is to try to entice you to come to Edgewood. It's a beautiful place. The springtime wildflowers are amazing. And it's different every time you come. And even if you walk the same trails, if you walk them in the other direction, place. I saw that you all raised your hands and you know where Edgewood is, so we can skip the map. But the aerial view might be interesting, and notice how the Highway 280 runs through there. That's the little serpentine gray line that's running through there. And at the lower right-hand corner of this picture, you can see the Emerald Hills area and that little triangle of dirt that's cut off by the... Talk about that later when we're talking about a rare plant. So what I'd like to do is real quickly go through the early residents of Edgewood and the people that have lived on the property. Tell us how lucky we are that it's still intact for us to be able to see it today. And tell you the underlying, and by that I mean the soil, causes of the amazing diversity. In order to do that, I'll talk about 4 different habitat types, and I'll show pictures of the flowers that grow in each of those. And then I'll give you a little brief look into the Friends of Edgewood and talk about how you can get signed up for a free docent-led walk, or how you can visit Edgewood on your own with some materials in hand that will help you identify the flowers. So by way of background, Edgewood was originally inhabited seasonally by native peoples. I say seasonally because there's not enough permanent water source in Edgewood to have supported a village that lived there, and we've found no middens or shell mounds. And then in the late 1700s, the Spanish government gave land grants to people that were as a reward for having gone on expeditions or to help hold the land for the Spanish government once it was discovered. So the 35,000-acre Spanish land grant that was called Rancho de las Pulgas, the Ranch of the Fleas, was what is now primarily San Mateo County. Then for almost 200 years, different people lived on the land, and developers and governments all had ideas of how that land should be used. Finally, in the 1980s, San Mateo County bought the land for $2 million. You think about it, right now, probably a $2 million vacant lot in Emerald Hills would be a steal. They bought it with the help of the federal government. They put in 50% of the money. 25% was given by Mid-Peninsula Region Open Space District, and the other 25% was from the county itself. And it is now one of the county's 25 park units, that is, once Tunias Creek opens up. Now, it was lucky that we still have it intact. 3 different times property was facing subdivision for housing. people had the ideas about how to cut it up and put houses up there. The state acquired it by eminent domain and was planning a college. The federal government thought it would be a good idea to have a solar farm on the slopes of Edgewood that were facing the sun. And when all of this was happening, Edgewood land was abused by the locals. It was kind of used as a dumping ground. I have found in there old refrigerator, old cars, an old stove, and a lot of garden trash because people didn't have another place to put it. Then when the county got the property, they decided that they wanted to put in an 18-hole golf course. And it was planned by Trent Jones, and it was all laid out exactly where all the different holes and greens were going to be. But then the California Native Plant Society, that's the NPS on this slide, and the Save Edgewood Park Coalition came together to try to save it. And at the same time, the bay checker spot butterfly became listed on the endangered species list. So those three things came together at a time that prevented it from becoming a golf course. The Friends of Edgewood came out of that coalition of people and has been protecting and restoring Edgewood ever since. So why is it so special? Only Natural Preserve in San Mateo County has some very interesting geology and topography. There's remarkable biological diversity. Did you know that Edgewood Preserve is only 3/4 of a square mile, and yet it has over 580 plant species within its borders? There are spectacular springtime wildflowers. It's home to some threatened and endangered species. There's 10 miles of trails and scenic vistas. There's vistas of Santa Cruz Mountains as well as the bay. And it's a window into the way California looked before all these non-native grasses and weeds came into the area. And you can find 18 of the 19 California state symbols within that same little 3/4 of a square mile. And there's this active, passionate volunteer group, the Friends of Edgewood. So how can there be so much plant diversity in such a small place? Well, what do plants need? They need sunlight, they need water, and they need some kind of soil to get their roots into. And depending on all of these variables here, the topography, whether it's a hill or a valley, how much the slope is, you can see on the upper west side, upper east side of the property that there's a lot of contour lines, so you know that that's a steeper area. If you look at the other side towards the west, you can see it's a lot flatter there, and that has something to do with whether plants like that kind of drainage or whether they need more sun. In fact, the direction that the sun goes, you can think about it running from top to bottom along that eastern border and out towards the west. The amount of sun depends on how steep it is, which direction it's facing, and where the sun is at a particular time of the year. And the hydrology, how the water flows in it, whether it's flowing underground, on top of the ground, all of those aspects come together to make the right kind of community or a right kind of place for a plant to live. But really, one of the big thoughts are the soil that lies underneath. You know that rocks break down and they make soil, and because we are very close to the San Andreas Fault, probably about a half a mile away, and the grinding and mix mastering that happened with all of the fault technology, tectonics, it's almost as though you put all those rocks in a blender and it's moved it all up and spread it back out. And so there's all kinds of different soil types throughout Edgewood. So it's one of the most complex geology in the world. I want to call your attention to the purple section here, and that's a section where you can find serpentine soil. Why do we care about serpentine soil? Well, it's only about 1% of California. It used to be 3%, but most of it's been paved over or built upon. But it's 33% of Edgewood. It was formed deep in the ocean where it's colder and a lot of pressure, and that that chemistry and physics actually made it be low in nitrogen. That's the fertilizer that we put on our plants. The first big number is N, how much nitrogen is in it, and it's also is high in heavy metals. So that makes the plants that live on it, they've adapted to it over the millennia. And plants that aren't that adapted, like the weeds that were brought in by the Spaniards or from the garden trash, are kind of excluded on the serpentine soil. There are some plants that live only on serpentine soil, and some that are indicating this may be a serpentine area, you need to look a little closer. Many of our rare plants are actually on this serpentine soil. So we talked about the ground that the plants live in, but all of those other vegetation, all those other variables created but different habitats. The woodlands are 33% of Edgewood, and that's the dark green that you see on the map here. Chaparral is 15%. Those are the sort of sandy-colored spots. The wetlands are only 2%. That's the turquoise that you see sprinkled around through the area. And the biggest part, 50%, is the grasslands, and there are both fertile and serpentine grasslands. And you notice that there are not really sharp borders on any of this. There's a lot of little fingers of things, and those create many transition zones, and that leads to the high level of diversity. Plants are able to find their little niche, the place that they want to live, and that all the conditions are just right. And the boundaries between all these zones are kind of soft, and so there's edges, and so we have some plants that live maybe in the woodlands and maybe in the chaparral as well, because where they come together. And there's also a concept of succession. If Edgewood were left and we didn't have all these houses around it, eventually there would be a fire. It would kind of level it off, and then the trees would come in because a bird dropped a seed, and it brought a plant or another one. And then over time, those plants tend to move downhill and all become one monoculture. But the Friends of Edgewood have helped to make that not happen. Now let's talk about the wildflowers that you see. When you walk along, you'll notice colors like this picture here from the Sunset Trail. You can see the little orange dots, and you say, oh, those are probably poppies, and you look up there and you think, man, I see some yellow, maybe that's goldfields or something, some of the things that we've had. But there's a lot of other flowers that you don't just notice as blobs of color. And I've chosen flowers from each of the habitats that we just talked about, and I'll show you some examples. I will mention which ones are rare, and I want to call your attention to some of the plants that are what we call belly plants. You kind of got to get way down and take a close look. And many bear close inspection. There are very intricate details in looking inside. So the pictures that I'm going to show are mainly close-ups. And don't try to remember all the names. Come back to Edgewood. Come visit me on a hike and see them that way. But just enjoy their beauty. And maybe it helps wipe away some of the blahs that we might be feeling from being indoor with all the rain, or because we watched the news tonight. And I will caution you that you won't see all of the flowers that I show you tonight in one visit, because they all have different bloom periods. They all wither at different rates. And some, when I show you, they only last one day. So let's start with the woodlands. That was the dark green on our map. It's the north-facing slopes, and therefore it's cooler and wetter. And the canopy closes in over the top, so it creates deep shade underneath. And so the plants that live there are happy in lower light. And the most abundant plant in the woodland is the coast live oak. Now, one of the first flowers we see each year is this warrior's plume, which is on the left. It's an interesting plant in that it is hemiparasitic. meaning that it's not a complete parasite, but it gets its start each year early in the season, before there's a lot of sun, by tapping into the oak roots. And so you'll always see it sort of in the drip line of an oak tree. You can't take that plant and put it and plant it in your garden. It won't be happy. It needs that oak tree association. The other plant that's on this slide is the houndstug, and I call your attention both to its beautiful blue color and down in the lower right-hand corner, the little seed pods that are there. Those have little prickles on the outside of them, and they catch onto an animal's fur or onto hiker socks and get carried away, so the seeds are dispersed further and have a chance to grow up in a different area. One of the beauties right now is this coast silk tassel. I know of one plant in Edgewood, I think it's on the Franciscan Trail, I think so, and it just looks like these icicles hanging down from the tree. It's actually a shrub, it's not a tree. It grows to about maybe 10 feet tall. The two pictures on the right are a striped coral root and elegant rain orchid. Those are both orchids, but small. They probably are about the size of the first joint of my finger, so they're not very big. They're not like the orchids that you would put on for a corsage to go to a fancy dance. The next one, this checker lily, is one that I think looks almost like stained glass, but it's very hard to spot because it's all shades of green. So it goes from a light green all the way almost to a chocolate brownie green. And you might be able to spot it if you look for a very thin stem with a whorled leaves going around that stem. And if you notice those leaves and then look a little further up the stem, you might see the checker lily. And the white globe lily has another name. It's called a fairy lantern. And one of our docents used to take her granddaughter and say, if you look really close and you really believe, you can see the fairies hiding inside. And this little picture that's down in the lower left-hand corner of the globe lily picture shows what it's like inside. So look at all that detail. Look at the hairs and the extra detail. It's amazing what these flowers have on the outside, not just that beautiful, lovely pink on the outside. Another bulb, like that last one is the golden brodia. These also have another name called pretty faces, and they don't compete very well against taller plants, so you'll often find them right at the trail edge a little bit later in the season. And the osoberry is another shrub, and it is the main place that I've seen this one is near the waterfall that's off of the Sylvan Trail, those of you that are familiar with the area. This plant is actually in the rose family. Next, if we look at the hillside gooseberry, notice the thorns on this thing. Those are some stout thorns that protect the plant. And this isn't the gooseberry that you make a pie out of, because look at how tiny those berries are. They're probably smaller than the end of my little finger, and they have all those prickles and a lot of black seeds inside, so they're not worth it to try to make a pie out of. Now, the California buckeye is an interesting tree. It's a summer deciduous, which means that it loses its leaves in the summertime instead of in the fall. And it also brings out its leaves earlier in the year. So oftentimes it's one of the first things that greens up. It has these beautiful inflorescences. The inflorescence here is probably about as big as my hand. And only a couple of those flowers will actually turn into the buckeyes, which is pictured down in the lower right-hand corner there. That buckeye, once the leaves come off, you'll see those little like leather-like pouches hanging on what looks like a bare tree. And that has this seed inside. Now that seed falls down and it will roll and maybe even roll down a hill. But no matter where it lands, it's smart enough to know which way's down and which way's up. So it sends its roots down and it sends the stem up, regardless of how it lands. Walking through the woodlands, you sometimes see this bright paintbrush. It looks like a little neon light back in the woodlands. The next plant I have here is the soap plant. Now this is a flower that you may not see because it only blooms in the late afternoon, and it opens one night, because it's moth pollinated, and then by the next morning the flower has twisted back shut and it looks like a little brown dried up leaf. And so if you don't get there at the right time, you never have a chance to see it. If you go on a daytime walk, you won't see it. Now I'm going to show you a couple of rare plants, the Franciscan onion and the San Francisco collinsia. These are both about the size of half of my little, my first joint on my little finger. And the Franciscan onion is along the Franciscan Trail and the Edgewood Trail, and the San Francisco collinsia is just past the waterfall if you walk up that direction, and it'll be, we thought it had almost gone away and that during the drought, and we weren't seeing it, and we thought, oh my gosh, it's left. Well, it just had its seeds move downhill, and the last year after it got really nice rain, we had a nice batch of it. So watch for that one. This is a rare plant. Both of these are rare plants and considered fairly endangered in California. Now let's move to the chaparral. If that was the orangey bits on our map. And these are just the opposite of what the woodlands were. They're south-facing slopes. They're hotter, they're drier, and for the most part, the plants that live in the chaparral have smaller leaves. They also may have a waxy coating or hairs because they're trying to protect their moisture because they're sitting out there in the sun all day long. Most plants, if you think about the ones that were living under the understory in the woodlands, they put their leaves out this way, so they're like little solar panels and collecting that so they can do their photosynthesis. But the plants that live in the chaparral, they turn their leaves up this direction, so there's much less of the surface being hit by the sun, and therefore it loses less water. As you notice from the picture here, the brush is somewhat impenetrable, and the only things that can get under it are bunnies and things like that that can slip underneath because there's very little growth living underneath that. And some very special habitat that we have in Edgewood is the serpentine chaparral. The most abundant plant in this particular habitat is the chamise, and you can see that's the white flowers in this picture here. But early in the season, there's another white flower, the buckbrush. And if you walk along, it also is called ceanothus. If you walk along and you sometimes have a little fragrant odor you might get, or maybe a little bit musty, look around and you'll probably see this plant. Especially if it's a warm day, it sort of aerosolizes that wonderful odor. The blue witch, the one on the right here, is a plant that's in the tomato family, which you can tell by the little seeds that are left over. It looks like clustered tomatoes that you buy from the market, doesn't it? And this is one of those plants where I say it needs close inspection. If you notice, there's little tiny green dots around that center yellow part. If you were just walking by, you might notice, well, it's a light purple, that's a pretty color, but you really need to take a minute and stop and look more closely. The chaparral currant and the chaparral pea are both nice little bright spots as you walk along what looks like fairly drab brush area. The chaparral pea is actually my husband's favorite flower. This next flower, the chaparral clematis, is the only one that I'm showing you in multiple stages. If you look on the right-hand panel, the upper picture, that's little buds that are just up on a light little stalk. Then if you move around like counterclockwise and you look at the flower picture, that's what it looks like when it's in full bloom. And then if you keep going, it turns into that sort of green, hairy business, and then it finally turns into a bad hair day. Each of those little hairy things has a steed attached to it, and those hairy things help spread it. It gets caught on something, it blows in the wind, and it helps spread it. Now, this one is called woodland monolopia, but it does live in the chaparral. It's also one that is considered fairly endangered in California. And if you're looking for this one, it's on the Clarkia Trail, coming just up past the big rock that comes out where you can sometimes find wild cucumber. And the one on the right, you may smell before you see it. It's the smallest mint that we have in Edgewood. And sometimes it always lives right on the trail edge because it's so small it can't compete with anything else for the light or the space. And if somebody has stepped on it or just rubbed it with their fingers, you get this wonderful minty aroma. And the gold circle that you see on there is actually my wedding ring. So you can see how tiny those little purple flowers are inside that ring. Two other serpentine endemic plants, these are ones that are found only on serpentine soil, are the pitted onion and the leather oak. Now the leather oak comes by its name righteously. The leaves are very leathery, very stiff. They even have some prickles on them to protect them because they're low enough that they would get browsed by deer if they didn't have the stout prickles. And you notice that little red ball on there, and you think, oh, that's the acorn, or that's the flower, or that's the fruit. It's none of those. It's actually a house that was built for a wasp. And the wasp injects the DNA instructions, the architectural plans for how to build a house for its offspring. And that little white thing that's in the picture in the lower right-hand corner, that is the wasp larva that's living inside that. So that's actually plant material, but the instructions came from the wasp that laid that egg. Crazy, huh? The next place we're going to talk about are the wetlands. There are very few in Edgewood. It was the turquoise on that original map. There's places dotted throughout Edgewood, but some are just ephemeral. The frog pond, which I'll talk about in a minute, there are also low spots that remain flooded, especially after all the rains we've had here. You'll have these little spots that still have standing water. And of course, all the runoff streams may be just while it's raining and then they go away, or they'll run for a little while afterwards. Some year-round wetlands are the Cordilleras Creek that's along the Edgewood Road, and there's also a small creek along the south side where the PG&E station is. It's along that side. And then the waterfall is pretty much year-round. When we had the two back-to-back drought years, by the end of the summer of the second year, it was just drip, drip, drip. It wasn't flowing like this. That's, again, why the native people couldn't live here, because there's not enough permanent water. This is a plant that you won't get a chance to see because it's way over in that south corridor where there's no trails, but Van Hoot's columbine I added just because I think it's such a beautiful plant. There is another columbine that we can see sometimes in Edgewood. It's not there very often. And the pink honeysuckle in the next picture can be in the wetlands or in the woodlands. And one plant that likes these two plants like their feet wet. The seat monkey flower is always where there's sort of an oozy, muddy wetness, and it likes that kind of an area. And the white rhodea notice how when you look at it from the front side, you see the shadow of those beautiful green stripes that are on the buds, but they're not on the inside of the flower, they're just on the outside of the flower. And this lives along the Sunset Trail, where there's a little bit of an ephemeral stream that runs through there. Also on the Sunset Trail is the frog pond. We call it the frog pond because these Pacific tree frogs use it if there's enough water runoff for the year and it lasts long enough. The Pacific tree frog lays its eggs there, and the tadpoles then spend their time swimming around till they grow their legs, and then they hop out. Now this frog is 1 to 2 inches, so it's about like this. It's green, it's the color of grass, so that's why we ask you to stay on the trail, because especially around there, those little guys could be hopping away. This particular picture is one sitting on my arm, because we were out there weeding and I found him. Also in the frog pond area, you might find this iris leaf rush growing in it. It's a plant that is happy just in standing water. It doesn't need, most plants, don't thrive in standing water for very long, but it likes it. Now let's turn to the grasslands. That's, remember, 50% of the space in Edgewood. It was the pale green and sort of a khaki green on our map. Most of the wildflowers that you are probably familiar with are in the grasslands. And we have both fertile grasslands where many of the non-native and weedy grasses can be, and serpentine grasslands, which tends to exclude many of the weeds, and you'll see more native plants. Early in the season, you'll see goldfields. They grow densely like this, and it's a beautiful golden haze across the grasslands. And then they give way when they start to wither, and the tidy tips with that little white edge, like it's sitting on a doily, come along, and it's more of a lemony yellow that you can appreciate. I was lucky enough back in the late 90s to take this picture of a bay checker spot butterfly, which is the endangered species that helped save Edgewood. We haven't had any butterflies in the last couple of years. We're still hopeful. We go out and do butterfly checks to see if they're there, and we would be thrilled if they came back. It's sitting on a California poppy. That's not one of its normal places to sit, because it's not one of their nectar plants. And the plant in the right-hand picture might remind you of that clematis that we saw. That was the one that I saw you in. It showed you in the 4 different sections. But actually, this is a cousin of the poppy. It's in the same family. And it's probably about the size of a quarter, maybe. So it's a good-sized flower, and you'll see it along the Sunset Trail. The narrow-leaf milkweed is the plant that the monarch butterfly needs to lay its eggs on, and for it eats the leaves to support it and its migrations. And this Henderson shooting star, the one next to it, is sometimes called mosquito bills. You can see by that beak coming out why it might be called that. It's an interesting plant in that the buds are facing upward. As the bloom opens, it tips over, and it winds up being buzz-pollinated by the bees underneath. So they actually unhook their wings, buzz underneath it to get the pollen to fall down on their backs, and then they move on to the next flower and share that pollen and gather some others. And then, when it dries out, it turns back, and the seeds wind up being held in a little dry cup until an animal or a human bumps it and helps spread the seeds. So it's different. And this one is out there right now in its rosette. It has green leaves about this big around, and it's blooming right now, or sprouting right now. Later in the summer, you can see these 2 beautiful lilies. the yellow Mariposa lily and the clay Mariposa lily. Those of you that took Spanish in high school know Mariposa means butterfly, and they do kind of look like butterflies sitting on the land. This is one that when you see it, I invite you to come and take a close look because it's very intricate inside, and you can see from the one on the right that it's beautiful, almost like a stained glass window on the underside, but when you look down from the top, it's just the white like you see there. And you can see this dark spot on the outside. That's a nectary that's inside, and all of the different lines and stripes and things that are on flowers are really like landing instructions for the insects. Come here, and this is where the good part is. And some of the things even we can't see because we don't have the same kind of vision that an insect does. But it's the instructions to come right here. I've got something good for you. Towards the end of summer, we begin to see the clarkias, the ruby chalice on the left side, sometimes called farewell to spring. And as docents, when we start to see those, we think, oh, the season's almost over again. That's too bad. And this little 4-spot clarkia is about the size of a quarter, maybe a nickel, and it has these beautiful purple 4 spots, one on each petal. Also in the grasslands are these 2 flowers that are in the geranium family. So we have a lot of geraniums in our gardens, but these are the native geraniums. The checker mallow, the one on the left, is a perennial, meaning that it comes back the same year, the roots stay there, and the sticks and stalks and stems, some of them last year over year, and then it reblooms the next year. The fringe checker bloom, which is also in that same mallow family, is an annual. It starts from a seed each year, blooms and completely dies back and has to start from a seed again the following year. Now the yarrow, the one on the left, this is an interesting plant in that it is one of the few plants that I know of that is what they call circumpolar in the northern hemisphere. So you can find this plant in Asia, in Europe, and here in North America. It's all the way around in the northern hemisphere. The silver bush lupin is often found as you transition between the shaded woodlands and come out into the more chaparral or grasslands. It's often on the edge. It's beautiful purple flowers. It's called silver bush lupin because if you look at the backside of the leaves, they have white hairs that makes them look very silvery. And this is in the pea family, and all the pea flowers have the parts where they have 2 fused petals that are up at the back like a banner, then wings that are out this way, and then a keel that's in the middle. And this keel serves as a platform for a bumblebee, if you can imagine, because this flower is about the size of my first joint of my little finger. And it actually, the weight of the bumblebee angles that down, and exposes the parts where it can get the pollen. And so an amazing mechanism for how that would work. Also in the grassland is this fragrant fritillary, which is also one of our fairly endangered plants. I show this one picture of it pinker on the inside. Normally it's not that pink, but this was so unusual and so beautiful, I wanted to take a picture of it. Yerba Santa, that means holy herb in Spanish. And this is one of the plants that finds its very special niche. This particular plant picture was taken on this Clarkia Trail coming up, and there's a transition zone right there. Behind this plant and to the right is a big serpentine outcrop. And then down from that is the more fertile soil on the left side. And this plant grows right along that border. It seems to like it right there. And so it just chooses, you can just look at that line as though it was planted in a garden. Now here's another one of our belly plants, this purple sanicle. That's about as big as the end of my little finger. And it reminds me, I'm old enough, of a satellite, Sputnik satellite, and what it looked like back in the old days. The owl's clover, the one on the right, is often found in groups like this. And when we have really good years, like we probably will have this year because of all of the rain we've had, you'll see big outcrops of this. You'll notice in the lower left-hand corner of this picture that there's a white one. In botany, that's not called an albino, it's called a sport. And it's, for some reason, some plants just don't have the color instructions that they were supposed to have, and they wind up just being completely white. Now, ethereal sphere is a bulb, so it comes back it stays under the ground, comes back every year, like if you left your gladiolas in the garden and left them there. An ethereal sphere comes from Dante's Inferno, and ethereal was an angel who supposedly carried a spear whose touch would turn Satan, who might be hiding in some guise, back into Satan, so you would know that it was him and not pay attention to him. So in the Dante's Inferno, the ethereal touches a frog with her spear, and it turns into Satan, and she knows not to listen to him. The royal larkspur is my favorite flower. I say that advisedly because it's like with your kids, you can't say one's the favorite. But there's so much delicate intricacy with this flower. It bears taking a closer look. Look at all the hairy bits and the different colors, and it's just beautiful. And it's just standing out there in the grassland. It'll probably be about this tall, and it'll have multiple blooms on it. Now here's another one that is a little bitty one. You got to get down and look closely. This plant, the whole plant, is probably about 3 inches tall. And it will last a day, maybe 2, if it's not too hot and not too dry. So the flower will come up and then wither away very quickly. The inset picture on the bottom left is trying to show you some of the intricate detail that's inside this flower. And the inset picture on the right, again with my wedding ring, shows you how small that flower really is. And so if you're just walking and talking, you're not going to notice it. One you might notice if you're just walking and talking are the red maids, the one in the next picture. Those are a bright magenta color, just the color that you see there. And they live on the trail side because they're not very competitive. They're low to the ground, and they just stand out as you walk along the trail. We have 2 endangered species in the grasslands. One, the San Mateo thorn mint, was down to 250 plants in the whole world. We got permission to gather some seeds, get them amplified, and put them out. And last year we had 38,000 plants. So it really pulled it back from the brink of extinction. And about 500 plants are in another location, so that if something happened in Edgewood, there would still be another resource. And the Penakita lives primarily in the triangle, that piece that was cut off by the freeway. There were a few in Edgewood, and we again got permission to take some seeds and amplify them. And this last year, we put them in a number of different places. Not me personally, but our group and the Creekside Science that we work with. They counted 18,500 plants in Edgewood now, and we're trying to get them to take hold close to the trails so that people can see them, because where they existed before was way off trail and nobody could get a chance to see them. So we're hoping that that's going to take. So the Friends of Edgewood has done a lot to try to keep these plants available to us. Our mission is to protect Edgewood's extraordinary biodiversity and foster the lasting connections with Edgewood and with the larger natural world. Our vision is that Edgewood be a resilient place, that it remains with that extraordinary biodiversity, and that people like you and me appreciate it and protect it forever. We are an all-volunteer group, and we have more than 100 active volunteers who donated this past year over 14,200 hours. That's like 7 person years worth of full-time work. We have many activities: lead the spring wildflower walks, staffing in the Ed Center, habitat restoration programs with hands-on as well as finance, and many other things. I know I'm getting close to running out of time here. So I want to invite you to come on a docent-led walk. They're every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, March through May. They start at 9 o'clock and at 2 o'clock at 2 different starting locations. And then we have special kid-friendly hikes on Saturday and Sunday at 10 o'clock. The tickets are free, but we offer them through Eventbrite so that we can keep the groups small enough that everybody gets a chance to see and hear what we're talking about. They're advertised 2 weeks in advance, but the tickets go fast. And we ask that if you can't use your ticket, to please let us know, because we often have a wait list, and it's disappointing for the docent if they're waiting for somebody who never shows up. But if you want to explore Edgewood on your own, this isn't an eye chart over here. It's just a sample of the wildflower survey that happens every week. There's a group of people every Wednesday. They walk one of 3 different routes and write down every single plant that they find blooming. So this Wednesday's sheet, there were 22 species they found in bloom. It has to actually be in bloom or they don't write it down. 8 of which were that they saw this past Wednesday were in the pictures that I showed you. So the season has started. If you go to friendsofedgewood.org, you can click on the Discover tab and you can find a trail map as well as this weekly wildflower survey. It has links to more pages in the website as well as an outside plant ID. I didn't have anything to do with developing the website, so I can brag about it. It is very well written, very comprehensive, very scientifically sourced, and wonderful pictures. So even if you can't get out in the springtime, you can go look at that and enjoy Edgewood. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope I teased you enough that makes you want to come out and visit our beautiful wildflowers. The wildflower walks start in March. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming this evening. Now, next month, we're going to change it up. We have a fantastic photographer, Robert Boomman, who really does fantastic work. He's been here before, and if you haven't seen any of his work, it's really spectacular, especially some of his new work that he's doing. And we have these postcards that you'll find at our favorite local restaurant, Buck's, as well as on the counter. And on the back, you'll see upcoming events. So be sure to pick up one before you go. And this evening, I just want to shout out just one little quote here about visiting parks. The most important thing is to try and enjoy life, because you never know when it will be gone. If you wake up in the morning and have a choice between doing the laundry or taking a walk in the park, go for the walk. You'd hate to die and realize you spent your last day doing the laundry. So when you get a chance, go to Edgewood and enjoy a good walk. Thank you so much for coming this evening. We look forward to seeing you next month.